What's up everybody, Coach Mills here, and if you want to climb the ranks of Overwatch, go all the way from whatever rank you've been at for who knows how long, and climb all the way to Grandmaster, then I have the top 10 mistakes that are keeping you from reaching your goals. If you iron out all 10 of these mistakes, I guarantee you will instantly start to climb. But without further ado, let's just jump right into it. Now, kicking it off with the award for the most obvious tip of all time, brought to you by Coach Mills, it's dying too much for no reason. Now, I know what you're going to be saying. Okay, this is pretty obvious. I know, whatever, dying, yeah. But the thing is, I guarantee that you're dying way more than you should be or could be if you were playing with your life as the most valuable resource. You see, a lot of Overwatch is being aggressive at the appropriate times and being passive at the appropriate times. And a lot of times, players really don't understand how to differentiate the two. I like to consider things in three stages. The I need to go in and push W, go in with my team. The I'm playing in that middle ground where I'm looking for an opportunity to either retreat or go in for more potential value. And the I'm getting the heck out of here. And these three scenarios are hard to balance. It's not easy to balance because it all depends on the situation. Now, if your team is all 6 members and one of you is ulting, you should be doing that first stage where you're just going in, balls to the wall, you are running into the enemy team because that pressure, that value, that momentum, that's how you win team fights. Now, if you have several people on your team dead, but maybe several people on the enemy team dead, you have an ultimate combo, or the enemy is overextending even though they don't have the numbers to overextend, and you might be able to get an opportunity, that is that middle ground second area, and that is so hard to get right. That middle ground second area is really, really so close to being one of those things that could easily turn into dying too much and feeding. The thing about being in that gray area is you always need to be thinking, oh, is there an opportunity here for me, or should I retreat instead? Always remember, though, that retreating is always the most safe option. If you have 2 people dead and the enemy have 2 people dead, just retreating and regrouping with your team is almost always going to be safer than trying to go in and get more value or playing that middle ground. But I'm not going to tell you that that middle ground doesn't exist, because it does, but there are a few things that you could do to make sure that you die less. Make sure that when you're in that middle ground, you are still in a position to leave if you want to. Don't commit so much to that middle ground that you set yourself up in a situation where you're too aggressive, you're too far forward, and you die as a result. It's incredibly important that you balance these 3 styles of positioning to give yourself fair value in every single game, give yourself opportunity to carry fights that you have no business carrying, but also make it so that you feed the least amount possible. Now, this moves on directly to our second tip that we need to talk about, and it's taking fights at a disadvantage. Now, the most important aspect of this is learning how to evaluate when is a fight at a disadvantage. Well, the thing is, there are actually multiple things you need to think about when whether you decide whether a fight is at a disadvantage or an advantage. If you are next to your spawn and the enemy have to go really far away to their spawn, then you have an inherent advantage that numbers might not simply cover. If the enemy have 5 people to your 4 people, but your spawn is right behind you, you got to remember that you're going to have a constant stream of people while the enemy have to take so long to get back, so every pick for you is worth multiple picks and value for the enemy team. Now, on top of that, if you have a whole bunch of ultimates and the enemy doesn't, you could use ultimates and convert that for numbers advantage. So if the enemy have 5 players, but you do like a Grav Dragon followed by a Nano Blade, it doesn't matter if they have the numbers, you could still clear them off and win the team fight. You need to be evaluating every single one of these factors separately to know when you should be taking a team fight and when you should not be taking a team fight. And generally, if you have no idea who has the advantage or disadvantage, if you can afford to give it up, if you can afford to back off, then do so. Back off, regroup with your team. If you're on attack, back off and regroup with your team. If you're on defense, try to stall, give up 1 tick, then take a full team fight, instead of taking a team fight, trying to fight for that 1 tick, dying as 4 members on the point, because in reality, you had a huge disadvantage, and then the 2 players that just respawn try to go on the point and they die, and it's a vicious cycle because you're consistently taking fights at a disadvantage instead of understanding what the actual win condition is, which is a pretty big concept that I'm going to talk about later. Now, moving on to the third big mistake that is happening to players of every rank, and it's not using ults to snowball. Now, a lot of people think, hey, I have this really cool Nano Blade, but we just got to pick in this team fight on attack on Temple Anubis' second point, and I'm not going to use it because we have advantage already. Let's wait for them all to regroup, and then I'll use my Nano Blade. That is not the mentality that you should be having, because guess what happens? You get that first kill, your team rushes in, and guess what happens? Your Ana gets picked, or your Mercy gets picked, or your tank gets picked, and then all of a sudden, you lost the team fight, or you lost like 3 people, and then by the time you actually Nanoblade, it's too late, and you're not going to kill enough people to make up for that super huge numbers disadvantage and spawn disadvantage. What you should try to be doing in your games is using your ultimates to take a small advantage and snowball it into a large one where you don't have to invest additional resources. If you Nanoblade right off the bat, your team didn't have to invest their really powerful cooldowns, your team didn't have the possibility of getting picked, your team got to save their ultimates, and then you get to take point control, you have point pressure, and none of your team dies, you have that huge sustain, and then you win the team fight that way. Understanding the reasoning for investing ultimates and snowballing a point is one of the most important factors in pro play, and it definitely pertains to ranked play as well, even if the vast majority of players don't understand this concept. But you could be the difference maker, you could force through ults, you could be the auto that nanos your Rein, you could be the Rein that aggressively shatters 3 people. Whatever you have to do, you could snowball these points and snowball these fights and win tons of game off the back of that momentum alone. Now moving on to the fourth mistake that you're most likely making in your games that is costing you a ton of games, and it's not giving enemies proper respect who deserve it. You see, there are specifically some characters that absolutely demand your respect, and you need to give them a certain amount of respect in order to destroy them in-game. Characters like Widow, Roadhog, and many other characters that have a one-shot capability, you have to give them a certain amount of respect right off the bat. You can't just assume that they're going to miss their shots. You can't just assume that they're going to miss their hooks. If you consistently play in a way that only works against very bad players on those characters, then as you get better and climb, you're not going to be able to actually overcome players that are playing these characters legitimately well. Understanding proper spacing, using natural cover, understanding how to counter these heroes, give them respect, and play in their lethality range. Try to play in a way that really cuts off their space and their effective playstyle, whether it's a flanking hog or whether it's a Widow that just plays really far back from her team. There is ways to counter every single one of these playstyles, but first off, you have to give a certain amount of respect to enemies. Don't just go walking out in front of them. Don't imagine that they can miss every single shot, because remember, if you give enemies a certain amount of respect and they still can't hit you, it doesn't matter. Not much was lost besides maybe a little bit more of an aggressive temperament. But if you don't give enemies any respect and they punish you for it, then all of a sudden you fed, you died, your value is finite, and you might be throwing the game because of it. So always start off with a certain amount of respect, and maybe as the game progresses and you learn about the character's weaknesses and strengths, whoever that person is playing them, maybe they're really bad at Widow or whatever character, then you can aggressively take more position and space accordingly. But until then, a certain amount of respect needs to be given, or else you're going to be the one getting punished and losing the game because you don't give them any respect at all. Now moving on to the next thing that a lot of players really don't think about, and they really get tunnel visioned, and it's identifying the win condition. I talked about this a little bit before, but you gotta really understand what the win condition is, and you gotta do everything that you can to ensure it. And you might be asking, okay, what is a win condition? Isn't it just killing everybody? Well, yes and no. Some targets are more important than other targets. Some targets require you to actually play for the point and not just for getting kills. Let me give you this example. Let's say that you are coming out to try to defend on Temple of Anubis defense on second point, and you're Genji, right? Now, you have a Wrecking Ball on the point, and he's trying to contest the point and get some value, but there's a Widowmaker on Arch, and she is just sniping your supports every time they come out. Your Wrecking Ball is trying. He is trying his best to stall, but his supports just keep getting killed again and again. Now, you could be like, I'm going to fight on point and try to kill someone on point, but guess what? That Widow is going to kill you. So you identify the win condition of this fight. I need to go kill that Widow and then come back to point and help my team. Now, if my Wrecking Ball dies and we can't stall the point, well, we lost anyways. But if I can kill the Widow, it gives us a window to where we can come back on point and not be sniped by the Widow, and it's a possibility of us winning. That is identifying the win condition and playing for the win condition instead of just thinking like really point-oriented or really kill-oriented. Because if you just try to go help on the point, you're going to get sniped by that Widow, your supports are going to get sniped by that Widow, and there's no way you can win that game. So identifying the win condition is very, very important, and it's something you need to think about in every single game. How do I win this team fight? How do I ensure that we don't lose? Or how do I make the best play in this scenario? And it's not always just fight on point or fight what your teammates are fighting or playing in a way that enemies will predict. Now moving to the sixth thing that most likely is holding you back from reaching GM or climbing through any rank, and it's letting your losses affect your wins. Now this is a really big one that happens a lot, and players really let their losses affect their wins more than anything. You see, a lot of times in Overwatch, there are going to be wins that are unavoidable. No matter how good you play, there will be wins that are absolutely unavoidable. And if you let those losses eat you up, you're going to be playing far worse in your wins. Even if you have something like a 75% win rate, which is a really, really high win rate, if you let those 25% losses really affect you, tilt you, make you play poorly, then that 75% is going to become 70, and then 65, and then 60, and then maybe you're going to actually start losing more games than you're winning because you're letting those losses affect you so deeply. Don't let the losses affect you emotionally. Take them in analytically, use them to help you improve, or forget about them altogether if that makes you feel better, and then go on to the wins. Remember, you're just trying to maximize that win percentage. Use that to climb over time. It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Now moving to the seventh thing that is probably making it so you can't climb out of the rank you're currently in, and that's adapting poorly. You see, adaptation can come in a lot of different ways, and it really depends on what your teammates are doing and what you can do about them either feeding or popping off. Let's say you're a support, for instance. If you have a really good front line, really good DPS, you don't need to be going for these really aggressive nade plays, sleep plays, or whatever, because if you do and you get caught out and you die, then you might lose a team fight even though all your teammates are doing the correct thing. Now, if your teammates are constantly feeding, they're constantly dying, no matter what you do, you can't keep them alive. If you keep pouring resources into them, what is it going to do? Absolutely nothing. But if you get a fat 3-man nade, a fat sleep dart on a Genji, or whatever, you're going to be able to carry a game and have a super huge aggressive impact in a way that really pushes your team forward even more than if you were just keeping them permanently pocketed. Because I'm sure you as support players, or anyone really, you're putting resources or helping someone out over and over again, and they just keep feeding and dying, right? That is when you need to adapt. That is when you need to start taking matters into your own hands, start putting less resources into them because they're using those resources poorly, and either give it to someone else or try to make plays yourself in a way that can actually have adverse offensive impact. Now moving on to tip number 8, this is a really big one, and this is getting too caught up in a meta or perfect composition. You see, a lot of players, and I think this happens a lot to lower tier players, they care way too much about what is quote-unquote meta. They say stuff like, hey, Doofus is not meta, hey, Brink's not meta, stop playing that hero. But I'm going to tell you something secret, and it's not really that big of a secret. Meta does not matter. Even at the highest ranks, even in GM, meta only matters really marginal, and yes, there are going to be some characters that really are good at countering other characters, but at the lower ranks, and pretty much almost all the ranks outside of pro play and maybe top 500, players don't play those characters correctly to counter other characters, and there's always gaps in everyone's playstyle. If you care way too much about the meta and say stuff like, we need a shield, we need a this, we need a that, we need a McCree for this, there is always ways to adapt your playstyle to play around characters. There's always ways to pop off in a way that gets more value, even through your counters. Don't get too caught up in meta or perfect team composition. In the long run, I promise you this does not matter, and an overemphasis on this can really just frustrate you when in actuality, you could be playing the perfect composition and still lose to a garbage tier composition because you're not playing it correctly. You're playing the perfect composition without understanding why it's the perfect composition, or the enemy is playing a composition that is actually good against your composition if you don't know how to counter in this one perfect way. So, big takeaway, don't care too much about the meta. Now moving to the 9th thing that is holding a lot of people back pretty much no matter what rank they're in, and it's having bad mechanics. You see, at its core, mechanics is like the fundamental building block of Overwatch. If you have good game sense, good positioning, good decision making, but you have terrible mechanics, you're going to be losing team fights, losing plays, and basically losing 1v1s because you have bad mechanics. Imagine you're a McCree at max HP pushing a 50 HP Genji, but because he out-mechanics you, he wins the matchup over and over again. On paper, positionally, game sense-wise, every single part of that play was the correct one, but your mechanics were lacking in a way that just made you fail that matchup. So it doesn't matter what good decisions you're making on paper, if you don't have the mechanics to back them up, you're going to be losing, and it's also vice versa. If you make a bad decision, but you have really good mechanics, Sometimes your mechanics can actually push you through a bad decision and have you come out on top anyways, and having good decisions can actually increase the possible plays you could make. You could be thinking like, I'm going to wait for this Mercy to rest and I'm going to go one clipper, or hey, I'm going to wait for this Doom to come in, I'm going to flash double headshot him. These are plays that open up as you get more confident in your mechanics, so make sure that you're putting effort and grinding your mechanics each and every day. Whatever you have to do on your select hero, make sure that you're consistently practicing your abilities, whether that's sleep dart training, whether that's just shooting headshots on Hanzo. Whatever you have to do to practice your mechanics, become consistent and you will have a much better time in your games. Make sure that you do not let your mechanics slip out of anything. Now moving on to the last and certainly not least tip, it's go get a Game Leap Premium sub. No, I'm just kidding. Sorry. It's having too large of a hero pool. You see, players that have way too large of a hero pool really hurt themselves in the long run. A lot of players will be playing like 10, 20 heroes, and guess what? If you're playing that many heroes, you're going to be struggling to improve on any of them, no matter how much you grind. Yes, your game sense is going to improve, but your positioning and specifically your mechanics are not going to improve that much on your select main heroes. Like, let's say you play 30 hours a week, right? But in reality, your main Ana, you only put 5 hours a week in, and the rest is between tanks and DPS or whatever. How much better are you realistically getting on Ana with only 5 hours a week practice time? You see, another person who is realistically playing only 10 hours a week, but all of it is Ana, is going to be improving at a much faster rate than you. Actually, probably more than double because it's exponential, and you are not improving that much, and in your mind, you're really stuck, but realistically, you're just spreading yourself too thin. So make sure to kind of tighten up that hero pool, really try to tighten up that roles, and try to play like maybe one role. Realistically, that's the best thing that you could do for yourself, but I understand if you want to play some other roles, but in reality, just try to tighten up your hero pool, and you're going to have a much better time, you're going to improve a lot faster, and you're going to have a more fun time in Overwatch just winning more games. But that's all I got for you today. Thanks so much for coming by. I'm Coach Mills, and of course, until next time,